Today I will be presenting my interpersonal communication project for class HSCO 508 at Liberty University. Next slide, please. Let's review some of the topics I will be discussing in today's presentation. We'll be discussing the definition for interpersonal communication, my overarching goals, my personal behavior blends, communication barriers, strategies and resources, and my action plan. Before we get started, let me give you a little information about myself. Next slide. My name is Melita, which means suitcase, which could be foresight into how my future was going to go. I grew up in a military home, and I've lived in 6 states within the United States. I'm married for almost 20 years, and I have 3 beautiful children. In addition to my 3, I have raised over 107 children in my position at Milton Hershey School as a house parent. I live and work now in my birth state of Texas. I'm a prayer leader at my church, and I am pursuing a degree in human service counseling with a business cognate. What is interpersonal communication? Well, in order to understand that, we must first define communication. Stewart defines communication as the consistent, complex, collaborative process of making meaning out of the transference of verbal and nonverbal messages. Stewart also likens communication to the process of inhaling and exhaling. In inhaling, we're receiving information from the sender, and we're exhaling, we're sharing information. Stewart defines interpersonal communication as a form of communication which occurs as people engage in conversation and listen in ways that takes full advantage of all the presence of personal. When we speak of personal, Stewart says we're talking about those features which influence our conversation, such as culture, uniqueness, measurability, responsiveness, reflectiveness, and addressability. Next slide. My overarching goal is to be open and disclose my feelings, thoughts, and values in conversation in order to create strong bonds. Also, to refrain from defensive communication and avoid immediately moving into self-preservation mode, as this behavior undermines effective communication. And lastly, to accept my true self, which will help me also be able to accept others. Next slide. In order to achieve these goals, I must seek ways to enlarge the conversation. Enlarging the conversation is just speaking to ways in which you can maintain the conversation and keep it going. Enlarging the conversation promotes open and honest dialogue, encourages continuous conversation, it's responsive and reflective on the information being shared, it mutually seeks to gain information and understanding and making meaning, and it also searches for methods and strategies for enhancing the conversation. Next slide. Slowakowski says a good way to effectively blend different personalities is to administer a personality profile that will help you gain a better understanding of why people act a certain way. Within our class, we were given a personality test. This test was called the DISC test, which provides an in-depth view of task-driven and people-driven personalities. The D, for instance, is an active and task-driven person. The I stands for an active and people-oriented person. The S is for a passive and people-oriented person. The C is passive and task-oriented people. Next slide. This test can be beneficial for leaders or supervisors in establishing a well-rounded team. Slowakowski states that a great leader understands the importance of capitalizing and encouraging the strengths of their team members. Effectiveness as a leader will be determined by their ability to develop cooperation, blend talents, communicate, and enhance interpersonal skills. At the beginning of our interpersonal class, we were asked to take this assessment provided by Uniquely You. I would like to share my results from this assessment. My behavior blend was that of an SC. The first graph, this is me, determines my behavior pattern in a private life. This would include being around my family and my friends. Some of the characteristics of the SC listed under This Is Me are detail-oriented, dependable, sometimes an overthinker, I'm a knowledge seeker and I like simplicity, and I'm also very protective. The second chart, this is what is expected of me, speaks to my behavior in a more public setting, like work, church, school, etc. And some of those characteristics are stability, trustworthiness, passive, submissive, and a peacemaker. As you can see, both of my graphs are similar, which means that I tend to be consistent in my behavior both publicly and privately. I wasn't really shocked about my results. Most of the information was true to my character. However, the assessment did highlight areas where I did need improvement. These are areas that need to be addressed in order to create better relationships. Otherwise, they can be barriers to having effective communications and relationships. Communication barriers for me are obstacles that can hinder the development of interpersonal relationships. Next slide. My first barrier would be self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is openly discussing relevant information about your present feelings, thoughts, and beliefs with others. Some of the contributing personality traits that hinder me from this are my shyness and my reserved nature. The strategy I'm choosing to help me overcome this is to focus on the benefits of self-disclosure, which is to deepen relationships and make me more approachable. And openness also requires me to be more self-aware, self-assured, and also trusting of others, that they would also be open to receive me the way I am. Next slide. My second barrier is defensive communication. Defensiveness happens when people perceive an anticipated threat. According to Burley Allen, in defensive listening, the person begins to tune out the speaker, contemplates his responses, and formulates questions to confuse the talker. My contributing personalities are sensitivity and protectiveness. My strategy in overcoming defensive communication is to recognize the positive aspects of the conversation and listen for truths which will help me grow from the feedback that's being shared. Next slide. My third barrier is self-acceptance. Self-acceptance operates in high regard of self, or just being comfortable in your skin, recognizing that even in your imperfections, you are perfect. My contributing personality traits that hinder this are perfectionism and also insecurity. My strategy for overcoming this barrier will be to recognize that I'm a human, therefore I'm subject to have mistakes. Recognize that my intentions are complex and that my responsibility is to take ownership for my part in any problem. Next slide. I've reviewed some of the strategies already, but I want to talk about some of the resources that we've had. Some of the texts we covered were Bridges Not Walls, How to Solve the People Puzzle, Why Don't We Listen Better, and Listening, the Forgotten Skill. My intent is to continue reviewing the information and materials we covered throughout the course. Every week provided deeper insight into areas where I needed growth. Even though my listening score was that of a level 1 listener, the book Listening, the Forgotten Skills continue to reveal areas where I can improve. I love the title of the book, Bridges Not Walls, because it captures my heart as a peacekeeper. The book also encouraged me to let others in, to speak up because I have a voice, to move beyond my comfort level, and to be assertive. Next slide. Doing this presentation was a huge accomplishment in achieving my goals and finding my confidence in my voice, as the introvert in me really wanted to just stay in my comfort zone and take the L. My plan is also to surround myself with people of different personality blends, such as D and I, so that I can adapt skills in areas where I want to improve. And lastly, I must remember SAT. In order for me to be open, I must be self-aware, self-accepting, and trusting of others. Next slide. I'd like to close with this quote by an unknown author. It says, "The world suffers a lot, not because of the violence of bad people, because of the silence of good people. I choose to no longer be silent."